of Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I have with me today Henry Pietras, and I anticipate Michael Zacchea will make it in through the weather. But I want to start off with a few little tidbits. First one from my good friend Marty Heiser. It's President Jimmy Carter. The quote is,
It's flopping.
"My faith demands that I do whatever I can, wherever I can, wherever I am, whenever I can, and for as long as I can, with whatever I have, to try to make a difference." That's for our good friend of Progressive Soup, Marty Heiser. This is for the Democratic Party. Note to Democratic Party elite: people are not protesting Trump to return the party to you. I'm going to hold this up. I don't have the text, but it's Social Security fun facts, essentially that Social Security has $2.5 trillion, that's with a T, trillion dollars in the trust fund. It is not insolvent. It is very solvent, very active, and does a great job for Americans. And this is for Exxon, former Exxon CEO going into Trump's cabinet. There's a few pictures there. One says, shows a windmill and shows a wind spill, shows turbines, and shows what an air spill looks like, and then shows an oil spill to show what an oil spill looks like. So take your choice. If that's what you want, if you want one or two, go right ahead, but 3 is the only unacceptable way to run energy. And with that, Henry Pietras, welcome to the show again. Henry has acted as my co-host on many occasions, but on many times as a guest. And we're going to have a conversation about some of these issues and probably more. Henry, start us off.
Well, there have been a lot of protests recently about what the upcoming administration is thinking of doing, mostly based on behavior that we've seen with the nominees, which are counter to some of the things that more progressive people are thinking. I personally do not subscribe to the idea of protesting unless there's a reason. Mm-hmm. I subscribe to the idea of discussing issues and coming up with evidence for or against a particular issue. I am not into spending a lot of time going against something instead of I prefer to look at it from the viewpoint of solutions. So for every complaint, let's come up with 3 solutions.
I like your mention of the word protesting, because Deborah Cohen and Diane Haas were on last week, and when they were out at Standing Rock, they specifically were telling media people who interviewed them, we are not protesters. We are water protectors. We're here. Our role is a positive one, not that of protesting. And yet they said that still, even having made that point to people interviewing them, by the time it got to the editors, it was still back to the old slimy term, protester. We're not protesters. We're not against anything. What we are is we're for something. We're for common good for everybody, things that make America better, not that bring us back to a time when America was, where women didn't vote, women didn't have the right to vote, not back to a time when blacks were denied the right to vote, not back to the time of slavery, not back to the time of the Red Scare in the 1950s. None of those are times when America was great. And with that, we've brought into our studio Michael Zacchea, and I'll let Michael explain refresh the audiences as to who he is, where he came from, what brought him to where he is, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some projects he's involved in. Michael, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Dave, and Happy New Year, and glad to be here.
A bowl of soup for you, buddy.
And a napkin. Yeah, and a spoon.
And a spoon. So you're all set.
Yes, we need hot wets today. Retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, combat wounded, medically retired. Had a shortened career as a result of wounds I sustained in Iraq. Retired to Connecticut and have been very active. I've started a number of nonprofit organizations in the state, advocating for veterans. I also am an appointee to the Small Business Administration. My term goes midway through, I guess, President-elect Trump's first term. And then I have been very active of late in the last year. I have 2 documentaries out, I had a film out, and then I have a book coming out in April.
And you've met with Linda McMahon.
Yes, I met with at the Small Business Administration 2 weeks ago, and by all accounts, it appears that she's very serious about promoting jobs through the Small Business Administration, promoting small business. We'll see. I actually think that there's a lot more going on politically. I have an impression, and it's just me on my own reading the tea leaves, but I think she's positioning herself for a run for governor in 2018. I think that Governor Malloy is making motions as if he's going to run for a 3rd term, and I think that it's going to be about jobs in the election in 2018. The General Assembly, we now have a tied Senate between Republicans and Democrats, and in the House, I think we lost 8 seats, or Democrats lost 8 seats in this past election cycle. So I think a flip of 3 seats would give the House to Republicans. So we're really not that far away, potentially, from the state, which is a completely blue state, becoming red. I could see it happening. I think that the goal is always to play for, in politically, the census year, because if you win in a census year, then you can basically gerrymander the districts, and I think that that's what the end game is for the Republicans. I think if they can do that, then our congressional seats, which are presently, all Democrat, they can gerrymander the 3 most conservative districts to go back to 2006, when it was 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats in our state. I'm extremely concerned about 2018 because we are 1 state away from Republicans having enough to call for a constitutional convention, which I fear happening, given what they would, as you were saying in your opening monologue, going back to a time when these things which women's voting rights, civil rights, a time when senators were picked out of the state senates by state senators as opposed to direct voting. A time before Roe v. Wade, a time before equality of marriage.
Yeah, we're only women that had money could get abortions, and they did. It was really all Roe v. Wade did was codify the ability of less well-off women to have the same opportunity as wealthier women. And I want to point out a couple things. Mike has the dark glasses on because it's due to some injuries he received in Iraq, and he has sensitivity to light. That's why he has his dark glasses on. And if you want to see Mike on some of his previous shows, all you have to do is go to YouTube and input Progressive Soup and Michael Zacchea. You'll see his name on the screen periodically during this show. And you can see some of the great shows he's done with Progressive Soup, and continue.
So, I think going back to John F. Kennedy's observation that with great risk comes great opportunity, I think that, our nation and our state and our local community, there's great risk, but also great opportunity for people of goodwill who want to maintain and move forward, in what I consider our shared project to perfect the union, to get involved and to do that. I think that that's what it's going to take. I think that, I honestly and truly think that a lot of people are buying a. So if you're familiar with the Trump University scam, where they thought that they were going to get to meet Donald Trump and everything, and what they got was a picture with a cardboard cutout, I think that that's what this presidency is going to be. I think in 2 years, people are going to realize they got a cardboard cutout and they thought they were voting for the real thing.
On a brighter note, you're here also to tell us about a couple of projects. You have a book.
Yes.
And you have a video project that you're working on, and we'd like to hear about those.
Sure. 2016, very productive. I had a documentary called Thank You for Your Service come out. We won an award at the GI Film Festival. It's a veteran anti-suicide documentary. Another documentary came out, it aired on PBS, called Military Medicine Beyond the Battlefield. And then December 2nd, I advised on a movie, I consulted on a movie called Man Down. And that is a movie starring Shia LaBeouf and Gary Oldman about a Marine returning from Afghanistan with post-traumatic stress. And he does not get treated, and it has tragic consequences. And it's a very powerful movie, really, really very moving.
Something like that happened recently in an airport in Florida.
Well, it's very, very timely. In the last 6 months, there have been 3 mass shootings involving veterans. Dallas, Baton Rouge, I believe, and then this past one in Florida. So, in the movie, Man Down, there's a part where he's walking through a sort of urban landscape, blighted urban landscape, and it says in red flashing letters, "America, we have a problem." And I think really that's there's an alarm going off right now, and I really hope that people hear it and heed the message. My book is called The Ragged Edge, a Marine's account of leading the Iraqi 5th Battalion. And it is, you can find it on Amazon. It's due out, it's in pre-publication sales now, but it will be published April 1st by the Chicago Review Press. We've gotten very good reviews so far. We have quite a few significant military endorsements. General Anthony Zinni, who is a Marine General, who is former Commanding General of USCENTCOM, has endorsed the book. Lieutenant General Jeff Buchanan, who's an Army General, who is the Commanding General of all U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Michelle Caruso Cabrera, who's a Chief International Correspondent for CNBC, has endorsed the book. So we're pretty excited about it.
Okay, now you were involved in training the Iraqi military. And as you've mentioned on a couple of previous shows, there were, not to give away the ending of the story, but you found some impediments along the way.
Yes.
And you found some difficult results. Briefly?
So, and the events that happened in 2004 tied directly into what's going on the ground in Iraq with ISIS today. I was the first American military advisor that built and trained and led in combat an Iraqi Army battalion at a time when it had never been done before and nobody knew if it could be done. tremendous difficulties, linguistic, cultural, logistic, and corruption, phenomenal corruption, just amazing corruption, that we tried to, as best we could, stem the tide of corruption, which really, in the Middle East, they have a formalized culture of bakshish.
Bashish.
Right. So,
Not to be confused with hashish.
right, yes, the B is very important, correct. And culturally, that's not how Americans or the American military work. So that was a very real problem. And then we were infiltrated by insurgents. We were infiltrated, the whole thing was all mixed up. Now, since then, there's sort of been an ethnic sorting, if not exactly an ethnic cleansing. But even then, we were starting to see the very beginnings of the Sunni Shia. They've always been divided, but the power plays that resulted in the bloodbath in 2006 and 7, which has resulted directly in the Sunnis being politically disenfranchised from the process in Iraq, which led directly to the rise of ISIS. We had captured this guy Baghdadi, and he was in U.S. custody in 2004, 2005. We let him out. We killed Zacchea in 2006. Baghdadi took over for Zacchea. Now, they sort of didn't do much for a period during what was called the surge, but they really, sort of got on the map in 2011-ish, which is when U.S. forces left Iraq.
As per the contract that was arranged, or the treaty that was signed during George W. Bush's tenure.
Right. So the Bush administration agreed for U.S. forces to leave Iraq in 2011.
Not a knock on Bush one way or the other.
Correct.
Because it was a noble gesture to get us out of Iraq and hand Iraq back over to Iraqis.
Well, there's one thing though, and the status of forces agreement was not renewed because of one event, and that was the Al Nasser Square massacre.
Was that Blackwater?
Yeah. Well, yes. They weren't called Blackwater at the time. Blackwater's been through several different iterations of who they are, but yes. And the Iraqi parliament and the Iraqi prime minister insisted that U.S. forces, in order to stay in Iraq, had to be subject to Iraqi law. And no American Republican or Democrat could ever agree to that. So that is why
even though when
negotiations fell
in
apart.
Rome, do as the Romans do. If you're in a country and you're no longer occupying it, then you should abide by, in my personal opinion, you should abide by their country's laws. Yes or no? Do you agree?
I don't agree.
Okay, go ahead.
And I've been in a number of countries that the United States has status of forces agreement with. And U.S. forces are always subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Okay.
The Uniform Code of Military Justice should be sufficient to address any legal transgression, however major or minor. So I don't think it's required that U.S. forces be subject to local jurisdiction, whether it's Sharia law or not.
Okay,
Same thing in
we
Okinawa
allow-
or Japan or Korea.
So if there's a trial, it's a military trial rather
Correct.
than a civilian trial within whatever Japan or
Right.
one of the other, 50 some odd countries where
Germany,
where
the
troops are
Philippines.
stationed.
Right.
Michael, I have a question. In your view, was it the right thing to do to remove the Baathists from government?
That is a very complicated question, and ultimately, I think what the process called debathification was poorly executed and poorly done. So the people, and this is Bremer, Ambassador Bremer, when he was the head of the CPA, he began a process of, and it was a 4-part process.
Explain what Baathification is.
So the Baath Party was basically, Iraq was a one-party political system. The Baath were basically an Islamic version or Iraqi version of Nazis. The party was founded by a guy named Michel Aflaq, who was an Iraqi educator who lived in Berlin during the 1930s. And he admired the Nazis, and he brought this concept back to Iraq, and he founded the Baath Party. Now, Iraq was a democracy in the post World War II. It had a prime minister, it had a functioning parliament, etc. But Saddam Hussein was our man in Baghdad during the Cold War, and our CIA, George Bush Sr., cut a deal with him and put him in power in Iraq in the 1970s. First as the vice president in 1972, and then as the president in 1977, and got him to start the war with Iran.
So he was the counterweight to our other enemy, Iran.
Yes, and we also put the Shah in place, and the revolution overthrew our man in Tehran. But you know, Saddam Hussein was basically a one-party guy, so everybody was a Baath. So the whole country had 150 industries that owned 210 factories that produced everything in the country. And in order to work in any of those factories, in order to be a teacher, you had to be a part of the Baath Party. So when de-Baathification happened, they basically fired everybody who did anything in the country. And so everybody's out of work. And part of that is they sold all the factories off, and then they...
Who did they sell them to?
Actually, they tried to sell them off, but only one company bought a factory. One U.S. company bought a factory. So that was part of the privatization, hard right-wing privatization of assets. But the other thing that they did was they unpegged the currency, the dinar, from the U.S. dollar. So it had been pegged at 3 to 1.
Yep.
Right. So one day, if you had $3,000, you could buy $1,000 worth of U.S. or worth of
The equivalent of.
right. Overnight, it went from 3 to 1 to about 1,600 to 1. So everybody's out of work and everybody's paupered.
Okay. Now I've heard that Saddam Hussein, one of the reasons why we went after Saddam Hussein was because he had threatened to unpeg the currency there from the dollar and repeg it to the euro.
I have heard that. I've also heard that he threatened to peg it to the Chinese renminbi or renminbi.
Okay. So in other words, but at least at any rate, to unpeg it from the dollar.
Correct.
And that drew a lot of ire from American corporations.
Right.
So how did this de-Baathification work out?
Oh, bad. You know, nobody could run anything. Nothing was being done. Nothing was being made. You know, we had to basically reconstruct the country from scratch, and that's what Reconstruction was. So
Everyone that worked basically lost their job.
Yes.
And the military, because they were all obviously Baath Party members, the military was completely disbanded.
Right. But nobody secured any of the weapons. So countries awash in weapons. Nobody has any money. Nobody has any job.
Artwork too, as I recall.
Right. So within a month, the first bombs in Baghdad went off. The first IEDs in Baghdad. So Bremer came aboard in May of 2003. He did all this, and by June of 2004, the very first parts of the insurgency had started. That the first bomb was the UN mission. They destroyed the UN mission in Baghdad. So de-Baathification did not work out, and you know, many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of deaths and injuries and shattered families, and trillions of dollars later, here we are with ISIS, you know, and Syria, etc.
So with all the resources that we have as a nation, why wasn't this thought through?
I'm sorry for laughing. It actually was, but the Bush administration, and especially Donald Rumsfeld, got rid of it all, threw it all away. Said, we're going to do our own thing. And they did not believe anything about the resource it was going to take. And you know, then you get Wolfowitz saying, well, Iraqi oil will pay for the whole thing, we're not going to pay for anything, it's only going to last for 6 months, you know, all this stuff.
Yeah, greeted with flowers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So, I mean, General Zinni, who had been the USCENTCOM commander right before Tommy Franks. He had done this entire plan. He knew everything that there was. He knew how it was going to go, and his stuff all got thrown away. He should have been the man on the ground for the U.S., not Bremer. But Bremer is a protege of Kissinger. Kissinger is obviously, if you ever read the Shock Doctrine by Naomi Doctrine, Kissinger was a lieutenant who was going to implement a hard right-wing capitalist society on the banks, in the land between the waters, that would serve as a beacon for the rest of the Middle East. And
Kissinger did a great job in Vietnam too, didn't he?
Vietnam, Argentina, all those places. The junta Chile,
Killing Salvador Allende.
The School of the Americas, where they'd have all these right-wing fascist officers come to train.
Is there one of those locally?
What?
The School of the Americas.
No, I'm talking about this place down in Georgia, which was I forget which army base it was, but people used to protest there. But they would train these guys here, send them back to Argentina and Chile and whatnot, and then they would have death squads and they'd kill socialists and communists and left wing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, people that were freely elected, like Salvador Allende.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that takes us up to about halfway through the invasion and occupation of Iraq. We're gonna continue, but we're gonna come back and do a second show. We want to talk about not only Iraq, your book, your film project, but also about local Democratic town committees, which I know both of you are members of the Brookfield Democratic Town Committee, and how town committees can improve themselves and do better not only in elections, but do better by the residents of the town that they represent. It's been David Stevenson and Progressive Soup. Henry Pietras, glad to have you with us, and Michael Zacchea, who's probably at this point he and Henry probably are tied for most visits to Progressive Soup.
Really? I didn't know that.
Just about 7 or 8, or I don't know, a lot.
It's been a quarterly for a couple of years now.
Yeah, pretty much. So, been Progressive Soup. Thank you for joining us.